Hey, I'm Adrian. Welcome to Queer Defined.
And I'm Mac. This episode is about the implications and experiences of being queer in school.
We both have had or know people who have had horrible experiences while being out and queer at school. It is infinitely important to draw attention to these experiences because they really do affect one's academic performance and ability to participate in school. As scholars, we need to respect the identities of our marginalized peers so that they feel comfortable and welcome in their learning environment. So before we continue, we'd like to issue a trigger warning for the following things: bullying and queerphobia in general.
Being queer in school presents a unique set of challenges, whether you're out or not. These challenges often exist on top of other pressures of being a teenager, which combine to make education even more difficult to achieve.
So, for example, queer kids are often bullied or ostracized by their peers in school. This impacts education because it causes queer kids to fear going to school or fear certain classes. This results in decreased participation and decreased learning. In studies done by the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, it was reported that 64% of students felt unsafe at school due to their sexual orientation. 44% of students felt unsafe at school due to their gender identity, and 32% of students did not go to school at least once because of these fears.
Well, you may be thinking, well, cishet kids get bullied too. We're not talking about that. Our point is that queer kids are bullied more often than cishet kids and therefore are taught by their educational institutions that their identities are bad. For example, the 2017 Youth Risk Behavior Survey reports that of LGBT high school students in the US, 33% have been bullied in the past year, compared to 17.1% of their heterosexual peers. 10% of the LGBT students also reported not going to school out of fear of their safety, compared to 6.1% of their straight peers.
So, explicit acts of physical and verbal harassment are major contributors to queer students feeling unwelcomed at school, but smaller acts of aggression have a large impact as well. Implicit incidents often contribute to queer students feeling alone and avoidant at school because they are more likely to go unnoticed by staff. I'm very fortunate to live in a very progressive city, so I've never really experienced any physical bullying due to my gender identity or sexual orientation, but I have been humiliated countless times because of these superficial aspects of my identity. I very, very vividly remember that one of the first experiences I ever had at my high school in freshman year was being ostracized because of my sexual orientation. So I was in drama class, probably the gayest class that you can be in. And I was put in a group with a cishet boy and one of my other queer friends. Once he realized who he was put with and that we both weren't straight, he very loudly said, "Ew, I don't want to work with them. They're weird and gay." So, although that's like non-violent and honestly not that horrible, like it's homophobic, but it's not the worst thing he could have said, it was still very, very mortifying. Like, it taught me that I could not openly be myself at my educational institution. And it also caused me to focus on him for the rest of the year instead of on the course. Like I was just constantly weary of my proximity to him and did everything that I could to avoid another interaction with him.
In situations like this, and in situations of physical bullying, it is important for faculty to intervene. However, many queer students who are bullied never report their abusers out of fear or embarrassment. GLSEN reports that 61% of bullied queer kids never reported their attacks, and 31% of those who did were met with no response from their administration. The notion that queer students cannot get help from their faculty is reinforced by incidences of unpunished bullying, but also by more nuanced situations where staff members exhibit queerphobic behaviors.
Teachers and staff who perpetuate queerphobic behavior make their classes inaccessible to queer students. For example, in my sophomore year, my chemistry teacher had very traditional views and would often use homophobic analogies to explain chemistry topics. Mac knows what I'm talking about because they had him too. Yeah, so being queer in a classroom like that, where the teacher clearly thinks that it's wrong, makes you not want to be a part of that class anymore. Like it got to the point where I would regularly avoid that class by spending time in the student mental health center and missing parts of class. And I think Mac remembers me coming in like 30 minutes late all the time. People being
Yes,
like,
I do.
where were they?
Totally valid though. Totally valid.
Yeah. So it honestly it really impacted my learning and made the class way harder to pass. But situations like that put queer students in a very uncomfortable place where they have to choose between their mental health and their education. Like in my situation, yeah, it was my choice to avoid the class, but the other alternative was constantly taking hits to my already low self-esteem.
I feel that, dude. The self-esteem of queer students, especially trans ones, really impacts their education. Dysphoria has a major impact on how trans students conduct themselves in school. For example, many schools, including ours, do not offer gender-neutral changing rooms for PE, and they have one bathroom, one gender-neutral bathroom. This creates uncomfortable situations where trans kids have to choose what part of the binary to try to conform to.
Yeah, like I dreaded PE because I would have to be in the girls' changing room and figure out a way to change out of my binder without anyone noticing. Also, on top of the fact that when I walked in, I don't look like a girl. I didn't dress like one, so it's kind of just awkward to be in a place where you so clearly do not belong. And like when I was changing my binder, if I was lucky, I could go to a bathroom, but they were always full. And so it got to the point where I would do PE in my binder. Please never do that. It was horrible, very dangerous, probably damaged my lungs and ribs forever. Um, yeah, don't do that. But that's those are the choices that you're forced to make, right? When you don't fit in anywhere and you don't want to make yourself stick out more. Um, yeah, the binder also hindered my physical ability because I couldn't breathe. Um, and so it decreased my performance and my grade in PE.
Dysphoria about things like one's voice can also severely affect a student's ability to participate in discussions, presentations, and much more. It can make it very hard to stand in front of a class because you're always worried about whether or not you're passing. Gender dysphoria is a sort of silent factor that prohibits many trans kids from exercising the full academic potential in school, and so it can't really be helped by the academic institution. This is why it's even more important to eradicate the queer phobia present in teachers and students so queer students have less to worry about.
So on this topic, there is a lot that cishet students and teachers can do in order to make queer kids more comfortable in their learning environment. The easiest thing to do, and a very good starting point, is calling out queerphobic behavior in other students, and if you're brave enough, calling it out in the staff members as well.
I came out as non-binary in the sophomore year, and I think it was about 2 months after I'd come out and changed my name, changed my pronouns, and one of my friends dead named me, and then his friends and my friends were all like, whoa, not cool, man. They shut him down like hard. And I felt great about that. I was like, oh, I got all this support. It's just experiences like these that show that peers, they make me more comfortable. They make us more comfortable when they are supportive of who we are.
So there are many things on top of this that the faculty can do in order to make their school a safer space for queer kids. Many of these practices can also foster acceptance for other non-LGBTQ marginalized groups. So acceptance in general is very important for queer kids because we often feel rejected by society and by those around us. So teachers should strive to demonstrate acceptance for LGBTQIA identities so that their students feel welcomed in their classes and are not afraid to report the queer phobia that they may encounter.
It's also very important to recognize that the LGBTQIA plus community expresses itself in many different ways and has different experiences based on more specific aspects of their identities. Teachers and peers should accept us as we are, regardless of how we identify, reveal, or conceal our sexual and gender identity. For example, Adrian and I both identify as non-binary, but have had different experiences and express our identities differently. Neither of us are invalid because of this, and neither are the people who expressed our non-binary identities different than the way we do.
So, being cognizant of a student's privacy is also of utmost importance. Many queer kids can't be out at home due to hostile environments or other factors, and since information and gossip often spread, teachers and peers should always be very careful about discussing that student's identity without permission from the student first.
This leads to another important aspect of allyship at school. Since many queer students cannot find support for their identities at home, creating those safe spaces at school can help those students succeed. Examples of this include things like the Gender Sexuality Alliance or GSA groups, a teen resource center, and LGBTQ plus specific support groups.
So, our high school provides all of these resources, and they have been very important crutches for me to rely on during my academic career. If you're part of the LGBTQIA community, do not be afraid to access these resources. And if you attend school in the US and your school does not offer any of these things, but does allow other extracurricular activities and clubs, they are required to also allow a GSA. There's going to be a link down below in the description box about your rights to forming a GSA.
A more general goal, but an equally important one, is destigmatizing being queer. If staff and students create an environment where it's okay to talk about these things, queer students will feel better supported and incorporated in those places of education.
So, destigmatization has many forms, but a good example is teachers being genuinely and respectfully curious about queer experiences in order to enhance their lessons and their own understanding.
Totally. For example, my Spanish professor, he came to me and asked me, hey, in Spanish, do I use O or A? And for him, I said it's okay to use A. I don't really mind. And then also when I first came out in the sophomore year, I had teachers be like, they were super embracing. They were embracing my new name, asking like, oh, that's a great name. Where did you get that? And that really just made the transition process a lot better for me and for them and for everyone.
Yeah. I had a lot of experiences like that too. And then one experience that we actually shared jointly was our TOK teacher asking us about our experiences with identities that don't really fit the gender binary. He was genuinely interested and wanted to expand his own knowledge. Um, Experiences like that really contribute to queer students feeling like valued members of their community because they're like, oh my gosh, someone actually wants to hear about what I go through. Someone actually cares and someone wants to be able to make it better.
This list is certainly not comprehensive and relates specifically to being a good ally to queer students. Also, very important to be an ally outside of school.
Yeah. So it's really hard to make a comprehensive list of these things because it all depends on people's experiences and what goes on in your town. But ultimately, it boils down to respect. We'll further discuss these things and ways to be an ally in another video, creatively titled How to Be a Good Ally.
And just words to live by in general. Just don't be a horrible person. See you next time.
Bye.